Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. In this video I'm going to be taking an exclusive look at the new NG Models Boeing 777 Series 200 samples, which they have been kind enough to send to me at yesterday's Airlines for another exclusive review. Now, as you can see, I have two of these 777-200s here, and the reason I've got the two is because each of them has a different engine option. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But before I get to the review, I just wanted to say thanks very much for watching the video. If this is your first time at yesterday's Airlines, then please like and subscribe. I tend to do a lot of this kind of content. I also have other channels at Instagram, and I'm strong on Facebook as well. Check out the groups like Way Better Group and the 400 Scale Model Group and 400 Scale and Detail. And also, since I imagine most of you know that I've just travelled all the way from New Zealand back to the UK, things are a little bit rudimentary in terms of the setup here. So I apologise for that if the video isn't quite as good as some of the ones I've done previously, especially with the sound. I'll try and remedy that in the future, but for the moment I'm living out of boxes and I don't have all the equipment that I usually would have. So anyway, getting on to this, the plan is to take a detailed look around these 777-200s and see kind of what I think and whether there's any room for improvement and, you know, what NG's been up to with these models. So that's what we'll get into in a few seconds' time. Okay, before I start looking at the actual mold samples themselves, I just want to talk a little bit about NG's choice for new 777s in 400 scale. I think it caught quite a few people off guard. I was certainly surprised. It wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting 747 Classics to arrive. I'm told that they are still going to arrive, but before then we've obviously got these 777s. There's also 747-8 and a Tupolev 154. So there's lots and lots of new content coming from NG Models in this year. Now, the 777, especially the Series 200, is an interesting choice, and I can understand why NG have made it. I think it's pretty clear that NG are going after several of the incumbent manufacturers, especially geminijets and Phoenix. And the 777-200 is a really good offering to attack markets that Gemini and Phoenix are strong in. Gemini themselves have had a 777 mould since pretty much the dawn of 400 scale, and they've used it quite a lot. And of the 477 or so models that have been released in Series 200 777s, Gemini have made a substantial number of these, I think way over 100. And a lot of them are very old. The Gemini mould itself is a very old mould. It may have been updated with rolling gear and aerials and such, but it still has a really ungainly seam which sits around here because it is a cradle mount mould. And Gemini have been very, very slow to upgrade to the new jcwings mould. I think they've only used it 4 times, and that's mainly, I think, because they wanted to use the flaps down offer in there. So there's a lot of old Gemini 777s in need of replacement, and a lot of them will be American 777s, which is core Gemini territory. And nobody else really makes a lot of American 777s or indeed European 777s, and that's because jcwings actively avoids competing with Gemini because of their agreement, and Phoenix just don't touch the United States. And if we move on to Phoenix, now they've had a good 777 mold since 2004, and again they've updated it with new engines and landing gear and such. But really, I don't think that the products that Phoenix and NG Models are offering are particularly comparable. I think NG's products are much better. Better detail, better accuracy, better print, just better across the board, really. So it should be quite a blow to Phoenix that NG are producing a 777 because Phoenix themselves produce quite a large number of 777s. And in fact, in recent years, they've been making quite a few Series 200s in classic schemes like British Airways, Landor, Thai Airways, All Nippon, that kind of thing. So the fact that NG's now moving into that market is going to be a lot more competition for Phoenix as well. And jcwings, they're the other party that's got an active 777 mould, and it's really very good. It is far and away the newest. It was only, I think, 2018 or 2019 that it came out. And it's actually a really good mould, but JCE being JC, they don't tend to use it that much. They tend to use it mainly for Asian aircraft, and obviously their release schedule is just incredibly slow. So there's a big gap here when you think about 777-200s that I think NG can fill. There's a huge number of old Dragon Wings and geminijets models from the early days of the 400 scale which need replacing. There's a selection of modern freighters which are still getting new colour schemes, and there's also a variety of some more obscure 777-200 operators that probably never got made in 400 scale. So there's a decent market here for 777-200s, and I think that makes a lot of sense, therefore, for NG to move into this area. It's a bit of a different kettle of fish when you talk about the Series 300, but we're going to look at the 300 samples in another video, so I'll discuss that there. So either way, as a roundup, in terms of the market share, I think that NG have a lot of potential here for using these moulds and using them well, especially as they look like they're going to bring detail which has not been on offer in 400 scale with the 777-200 mould to date. So let's get into looking at the mould samples in more detail. I'm going to start off with the sample which is using the General Electric GE90-94B engine option. But initially we'll take a look just at the fuselage and the wings and the other portions of the sample. Now, NG have never produced a bad mould, at least not to date, or at least not one they've shown me. So I really, wouldn't expect this to be weak. I'd expect it to be a strong 777, and you can see from the image here that overall the model is looking great just from these views. But we should look in more detail than just this kind of generic, wave it around the camera sort of view. So that's what I'll be doing here. So let's start off at the front of the aircraft. Now the 777 has a really distinctive nose profile. We just move it up in the camera and zoom in a little bit. There we go. The 777's got a really distinct nose profile, as I say. It's got quite a round nose for a Boeing aircraft, and it's got quite a large curve down to the fuselage, to the cockpit, which is mounted actually, seems quite low on a 777 compared to some other Boeing types. And I think that overall here, the shape is pretty good. If we take a look at the real thing, then I think you can see that if I'm looking here at the nose, then overall the curve of the nose here is good, and also the change of angle up to the cockpit. I'm liking that a lot. So I don't see any major issues with the actual curve of the nose or the shape of that cockpit region. I'm not 100% sold on the cockpit windows, I have to say. They're generally not bad. If we try and look at it front on, you see they have quite a good profile. But I am a little concerned by the windows on the outer edge because they do seem to slightly dip down, and on the real thing, you just don't see that. So I think that the shape of the outermost windows here on the cockpit, just these two here on the other side, is not 100% correct. And I also think the underside perhaps could be pushed up slightly more as well. So that's a very minor modification. Overall, I think this nose area, is looking good. No major concerns there with that portion of the model. I do think also that maybe the angle of the roofline just up here is also not necessarily 100% where it ought to be. It just seems a little bit angular where it joins the fuselage here. It's a really minor point, and I'm not sure. It's hard to tell when you look at the picture. Sometimes in some photos it looks more angular than others, but maybe the curve there is not quite as it ought to be. Moving to the nose gear, and you can see that NG are working on a lot of detail. Now when you look at things in a hyper detail like this, then they can look quite simple, but actually the nose gear on this 777 is quite delicate, or at least it's very thin. It's actually quite sturdy gear, but it's very thin. And it's in the right place. It's got the right sort of shape. The tyre is well sized. There's no major complaints about the gear leg itself. I'm not so enamoured with the nose gear door. I do think that it's perhaps a little bit not tall enough here, not quite deep enough. It's very small and should be an easy thing to modify, and it could be just that it's not been fitted well on this sample, hard to say. So overall, I think that the front portion of the aircraft here is looking really nice. And as you can see, it displays very well from different angles. But if I'm going to complain, which is obviously what I'm here to do, then minor modification to that outer cockpit window, slightly larger gear door, and maybe just smooth off that curve at the top of the fuselage. Not certain. So either way, it's a good start. Let's move on to the main gear and the wing fairing join. So onto the mid portion of the aircraft, and in this part of the review I'm going to look at the wing seam join here and the fairing that goes around it and the main gear. I'm going to ignore the engines for the time being because they are different on different versions of the mould. But if we look broadly here across at the wing fuselage join, then you see it's nice and tight. And this is one of the things that the newer jcwings mould struggles with sometimes. Sometimes there's a bit of a gap between the wing and the fuselage, which isn't so great. But here, NG have got this spot on. Obviously, it's a seamless slotting wings mould, as most modern moulds are. And moving across, looking underneath, then again, there's some really nice detailing, and it's a nice tight fit. You've got the intakes here etched in, as you'd imagine, and the fairing shape and join to the wing look really good to my eye. No problems there whatsoever. Moving to the main gear, and this is really nice. It's actually a really complex main gear door section on the 777, and it's got this really unique and unusual shape, and they've got it really nicely done here, to the extent that they've even got this little lip portion here correctly positioned. So it's really well done, the gear. And if you look at from the front, then again, it's nice and delicate, looks really good, but it's still quite strong, and I don't think it's going to break easily. So I think they've done a really nice job again with the main gear. Now, one of the things which you may have noticed here is that the main gear isn't moving, and usually for 777s, because you've got this triple bogey, most of the manufacturers enable some kind of movement in the gear leg here, so you can change this position of the main gear. And NG do not allow for that, and I think that's partly because they're trying to go for the most accurate version of the 777 they can, and they think that that sort of thing damages the integrity of the gear leg somewhat. Now, I'm not sure it does or doesn't, but I don't think it's really needed in terms of the movement. It's nice, but it's not needed. And if it can make the gear look more accurate, then I'm all for removing it, because after all, you're displaying these models primarily flat on the ground since they've got the gear down. It's not often that they're being shown in other configurations, and NG don't do flaps down, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have movable landing gear anyway. Now, one thing which I didn't originally notice in my written review but was pointed out to me by somebody else, and they're completely right, is that the landing gear on this 777-200 mould actually more successfully represents the landing gear of a 777-300 ER, and that's because there is this extra hydraulic actuator, which is, you can see here, just coming down from joining to the bogey there in the forward part, and that should not be present in a 777-200. Interestingly, one of the 777-300 moulds that they sent me through actually doesn't have that actuator, so I get the feeling that NG have just accidentally attached the wrong gear to this Series 200, and they've got a 777-200 proper main landing gear, but it is nonetheless a mistake on both of the Series 200 samples they've given me here. So that's something, a very minor thing, which it looks like they've already got a fix for, but just have attached the wrong gear to the sample. Moving on to the wings themselves, and they look good. Nice shape, right selection of flaps and ailerons. It's got good dihedral when you look from the front, no problems there. Generally good. Now, one thing I have noticed, and this is me nitpicking again, is that the flap track fairings on the wing here are not quite as I'd like them to be. The outer ones aren't too bad. I think they're okay, but this inner one looks a little too small. If you look on the 777 wing, then it is a different shape to the outer ones, and there's a bit of a bulge which happens just here. And I don't think they're showing it enough. I think the flap track fairing is not chunky enough in that portion just under the wing where it begins. So that's something that I think, again, it's a very minor detail, but something which personally I would change if I could. So that's the middle of the aircraft, looking really nice. We'll move now to the rear end of the plane. Now, 777's got a very distinctive back end because it has this very distinctive screwdriver-shaped tail, and it's got a very tall vertical stabilizer as well. Now, looking at the stabilizer, it is actually probably one of the weaker parts of the mould that we have here, and that's for a couple of reasons. As several people have pointed out, one of the issues is this curve here at the front, which is far too curvy for a 777 tail. It looks a bit more like a 787, so that needs to be straightened out somewhat. But also you've got issues with the rudder here, which is not correct. On the sample there's one large rudder and it doesn't reach the top of the tail, and that's not accurate. On a 777, the rudder should reach effectively the top of the tail, and then there's a little horizontal rectangular hinge box there which connects it to the main stabilizer. Also, on a 777, there is a secondary rudder inset within the main rudder which runs about here, and that is not present on this. And on the other side of the tail, you should be able to see the little bulges where, again, the hinges are for that, and they're not present. So NG have not really got the tail right at all in terms of the rudder shape and size, or necessarily this portion up here. Moving to the actual tail cone itself, and NG here have surprised me a little bit, because I would be expecting to see the two little fairings, the two little, I'm not sure if they're lights or what they are, but the two little projections that come out the top and bottom, little prongs. I can understand why they might not put them in. I know that on some of the manufacturers have struggled with these and they look too large, but I'm a little surprised NG haven't got them. JC do, and they actually look really good on the jcwings 777, so that's a little surprising that they aren't there. So what I'm going to do now is move over to the feature which I think will define these 777s, and that is the engines. The fact that NG Models has moulded different engines for different 777s, which should give a much more accurate representation of the aircraft for different airlines. Okay, so I have got in total 4 different Boeing 777 mould samples from NG Models. And the reason I've got 4 is 2 are 200s, 2 are 300 ERs, and they all have different engine variants associated with them. In this review, I'm just looking at the 200, so I'll just look at the engines that are equipping this pair. But obviously, the engines are interchangeable across the different moulds, as are the wings. So this is obviously the Series 200 wing, which will also be useful to represent the Series 300s, as opposed to the 300 ER, which has a different wing, which could also represent the 777-200 LR. So in terms of the engines, what we have here is we've got one of these 777-200s has got the General Electric GE90-94Bs. That is this one over here. And one of these, the one in the foreground, has got the Pratt & Whitney PW4000s. So let's take a look at each of those engines, look at the differences, and understand some of the choices which NG have made. I'll start with the General Electric GE90-94Bs, and this engine is different to the General Electric version, which is powering a lot of the 300 ERs and later 200s, and is worn by one of the other 777 samples that I've got. The differences are relatively minor, and primarily in the fans. From the side, they look quite similar. You can see here, if we bring this close to the screen and try and get the focus. Here we go. But you've got this nice big nacelle. You've got a two-stage exhaust, which has quite a different attachment to the pylon compared to the Pratt & Whitney we'll look at in a minute. You can also see that the engine pylon itself comes across the top of the engine quite a long way till near the front, which again is different to the Pratt & Whitney. So the engine pylons here are looking really good. They fit really snugly with the engine, and I think that the form and structure of the exhaust portion of the nacelle look really good. Moving around to the front of the engine, and the first thing that became obvious to me and was a little surprising initially is that these are solid core engines. We've gotten used to seeing in 400 scale see-through fan blade engines, and even recently rotating fan blade engines. Now, I'm not a fan of the rotation. I think it's a waste of time. The see-through fan blades can look good. However, NG have confirmed with me that the reason they've not gone down the line of using see-through fan blades for any of these 777 engines is because they want the engines to be as accurate as possible. And I agree that all of the see-through fan blade engines I see do not look accurate. They can often look really good, but when you compare them to the engines, they are not accurate. They usually don't have enough fans or fan blades, and they don't usually have the correct spacing to enable that kind of see-through effect. So in essence, you get something which looks kind of cool, but isn't accurate. And NG here are really keen to make these blades as accurate as they can. So I think it's worthwhile. It's a perfectly reasonable trade-off to get a more accurate engine, in my opinion. And certainly the fan blades for this GE90 look really good. The blades on this version, the 94B, are slightly smaller than the blades on the later version, which is on one of the 777-300s. The diameter is smaller, so the engine diameter itself is smaller, and that is shown in the engine here when you compare it to the 300, as I will tomorrow. Also, the blades are not quite as curved as on the other engine. So the blades are looking really nice. I think that this looks hyper realistic, and from the side you've got really nice detailing and the correct configuration of the pylon. Now if I try and move the other one into screen at the same time, if that's possible, you'll see that there are some obvious differences from the side here in terms of the look and feel. For starters, the upper engine, which is the Pratt & Whitney, has a much smaller pylon that attaches further back on the engine, and you'll see that the detailing at the rear of the exhausts where they join the pylon are very different as well. They're not the only differences, so let's take a look now at the version which is wearing the Pratt & Whitney engines. So from the side, it's obvious that the join here is different in terms of where the engine meets the pylon. I think they've done that partially for effect in terms of the colouring here, making it fit, but it does look quite good, and if you look at close-up images, it does bear a close resemblance to the way it looks. The engine itself is also a little bit smaller in diameter than the GE90s, even the older 94Bs, and so it is a slightly smaller engine. And when you move around to the front, again we've got this very detailed but static and solid core engine. And again, you can see that the diameter of the engine definitely seems smaller than on the GE engines. If I try and pull one of those into screen at the same time, you see it looks smaller and it appears to have a thicker rim, though that's a little bit of an optical illusion. And the blades are substantially different. So I really like this concept of getting the engines unique. It's something that, to be honest, I'd never really paid a great deal of attention to previously, but I can see now that it does make a significant difference to the look and feel. Certainly, you know, even if you're ignoring the blades, the attachment point of the pylon is so different for the Pratt & Whitney compared to what you've got on the General Electrics, that the engines really do have quite a different look and feel. So it's something that I can commend NG for. I don't mind losing the play factor, so to speak, of the see-through engines, because I think that accuracy is a more desirable attribute of these models. So for me, that's good, and these engines are looking really nice. And as I say, in the next review, which I'll do for the Series 300, we'll be able to take a closer look at the other two engine options, which are the Rolls-Royce Trents and the later version of the General Electric GE90. I hope you've enjoyed this look around the new NG Models 777-200 series mould samples that they've been kind enough to send to me. Thank you very much, NG Models, for doing that. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure the community also appreciates being able to see these samples early. Personally, I wasn't that excited by the 777s when they were first announced, but I've almost convinced myself that I am excited now. There's quite a lot of potential for these 777-200s, especially in my collection, to replace old Gemini molds, things like Continental Airlines, United Airlines, where I've got 777s and American Airlines, and those kind of carriers, which will make a really nice addition to the collection and make it more realistic, especially now we've got these different engine options for those. So, in my opinion, NG has got the basis of a really good mould here. However, it is clear that there is a reasonable amount of rework required in quite a few areas, and arguably this is probably the weakest sample that they've sent me to date. It's clear looking at the mould that there are some issues in terms of the angle of the fuselage here. The cockpit windows need some rework. The gear doors need to be increased in size slightly. Flat track fairing shape is not as good as it might be. Obviously, we've got to get the right undercarriage on the aircraft. Some rework around the tail cone would be nice. Plus, we need a reshaped tail with a proper rudder. So there's plenty of work to be done. But having said that, a lot of these things are relatively minor. I mean, the biggest concern is probably the shaping around here, modifying the gear doors, modifying the undercarriage, modifying the tail. These things should be all relatively simple. And fundamentally, the engines, the wings, and even most of the fuselage and the nose shape, I actually don't have major concerns about. So I do think that there's work to be done. NG have said to me that they will be fixing issues that have arisen from my reviews and from feedback from others. So I think there's a good chance that this is going to be another really good mould for NG Models. Certainly, I think it will sell well when they start producing these, and NG has got a potential to have a really, successful run of 777s ongoing for quite a few years here. Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody. There'll be another video looking at the 777-300 mould samples, hopefully over the next couple of days. As always, like and subscribe to the video and the channel if you enjoyed it. Check out my Instagram channel at Yes to Airlines and also Facebook groups. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you later.